I think I didn't do anything wrong, just tried to show that I could stay friends with someone from my past. That's all it was. A harmless invitation, a gesture of maturity. But the night my ex walked into our new home and my husband calmly handed me my packed bag, I realized I'd built my perfect life on arrogance and denial. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I think I didn't do anything wrong, just tried to make our new housewarming fun and memorable. Everyone said moving into a new home was supposed to be a celebration, not a tense dinner. I wanted laughter, people, stories. I wanted to prove to everyone that Ethan and I were fine, that we'd made it. I didn't realize, or maybe I refused to, that my idea of fun would become the start of everything falling apart. The house still smelled like fresh paint when I started sending out invitations. I made the guest list myself, mostly friends from work, a few family members, and, without hesitation, my ex-boyfriend, Caleb. I added him like it was the most natural thing in the world. We hadn't spoken in years, but he'd texted congratulations when I posted photos of the house online. I thought inviting him would show everyone that I was mature enough to be friendly with my past. That was the story I told myself anyway. When I mentioned it to Ethan, he looked up from assembling furniture and said, "You mean Caleb Drew?" I said yes, like it was obvious. He paused for a moment, then said, "You're inviting your ex to our housewarming." I said, "It's not a big deal. We're adults." He said, "It feels like one." I laughed, told him not to be insecure. He didn't argue, just nodded once and went back to tightening screws. That's what annoyed me most about Ethan, his quiet. He'd never shout or accuse, just absorb everything like water on stone. I always mistook that for weakness. It made me feel powerful, like I could decide what was harmless and what wasn't. When I told my sister Nora, she said I was brave. "Most men wouldn't be okay with that," she said. "You've trained him well." We laughed, clinking our wine glasses. I liked how it sounded, like I was the kind of woman who could handle men, who could manage them without cruelty. Martha, my mother-in-law, didn't think it was funny. She called the next morning, after seeing the invitation post online. She said, "You're playing with fire." I said, "It's called being civilized." She said, "You call it that until it burns your house down." Ethan didn't bring it up again, so I assumed he'd gotten over it. I threw myself into preparing for the party, candles, playlists, matching dinnerware. I wanted people to walk in and feel envy, the good kind. I wanted them to see a couple so secure that even an ex-boyfriend was welcome at the table. That was how I justified it to myself. At work, I told my coworkers about it. They laughed when I said Ethan had been uncomfortable. "He's quiet, right?" one of them said. "He'll probably just stand in a corner." I smiled and said, "That's what he does best." It felt good to say it. The laughter that followed made me feel admired. Ethan came home late that week, carrying boxes I hadn't even asked for. Kitchen shelves, curtains, tools. I teased him, saying, "You're making it too practical. It's supposed to look like a Pinterest board." He said, "It's supposed to look like a home." I rolled my eyes and told him not to overthink the party. He said, "I'm not. I just hope you're not underthinking it." The way he said it made me uncomfortable, but I brushed it off. The night before the housewarming, I stayed up late texting Caleb. It started innocently, details about parking, mutual friends. But then he joked, "Can you believe you're inviting me into your husband's house?" I replied, "He's cool about it." Caleb said he must be, or he's pretending. I told him Ethan wasn't the jealous type. He said, "Maybe he should be." I laughed, typing, "You'll see, he's harmless." Ethan came into the room while I was smiling at my phone. He asked, "Who's keeping you up?" I said, "Just party stuff." He said, "You're sure it's not Caleb?" I froze for a moment, then smiled like I had nothing to hide. "You're ridiculous," I said. He didn't respond, just looked at me for a long time, then said, "Okay," and went to bed. When I joined him later, he was pretending to be asleep. I placed my phone face down on the nightstand and whispered, "Don't be moody tomorrow." He didn't move, didn't answer. The next morning, he made breakfast quietly. I tried to lighten the mood, saying, "You'll like Caleb, he's actually very charming." He looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "I know." I thought he was being sarcastic, but now I think it was something else. Acceptance, maybe. The kind that comes before action. Nora arrived early to help with decorations, laughing as she said, "You're really doing this, huh?" I said, "Why not? It's just a party." She said, "Just don't let Ethan's family see you getting too close." I said, "They need to see how normal we are." When Martha came in, she didn't even take off her coat. She looked around and said, "It's beautiful. Shame about the guest list." I said, "You could stay home if it bothers you." She said, "I'll stay. I like to witness lessons being learned." I rolled my eyes but smiled politely, as if I didn't care. That afternoon, Ethan spent an hour cleaning the kitchen that was already spotless. I told him to relax, that the night would be fine. He said, "I know it will." He looked almost peaceful when he said it, which confused me. Usually he fidgeted before gatherings, hated crowds, but that day he just kept wiping the counters in slow, steady movements. Before guests arrived, he checked his phone for a long time, then put it in his pocket and said, "Everything's ready." By sunset, the lights were warm, the house smelled like food and candles, and the first cars began to pull up. I felt triumphant, like I'd proved something to the world already. When Caleb's car turned into the driveway, Nora whispered, "Here comes trouble." I laughed, pretending to be calm. Ethan stood by the door, greeting each guest with his usual politeness. When Caleb finally stepped inside, Ethan extended his hand, smiling. "Welcome," he said quietly. Caleb looked surprised. I held my breath, waiting for Ethan to react, to say something sharp, but he didn't. He just smiled at both of us, the kind of smile that made me uneasy. Later that night, I'd realized that smile wasn't calm, it was preparation. The night of the housewarming started with the kind of noise I loved. Music low, laughter spilling from every corner, the smell of wine and perfume mixing in the air. I moved through the rooms like a hostess in a commercial, smiling too wide, holding my glass like a prop. Ethan was polite, but distant, greeting people, making sure the food stayed warm, avoiding any real conversations. He didn't hover, didn't question, he just watched, and that bothered me more than if he'd shouted. Caleb arrived half an hour late, as if he'd timed it for effect. He came in wearing that familiar smirk, the same one that used to melt me years ago. He handed me a bottle of wine and said, "For old time's sake." I laughed too loudly and said, "Let's make new memories instead." People around us chuckled, and I saw Ethan from across the room, expressionless, holding a tray of glasses. Nora nudged me and whispered, "You're enjoying this too much." I said, "It's called confidence." She said, "It's called baiting him." I rolled my eyes. Dinner went smoothly at first. Caleb told stories from our college days, stories that always made me look charming, brave, rebellious. I pretended to cringe while secretly enjoying the attention. The guests laughed, and I could feel them watching Ethan, waiting for a reaction. He smiled politely at all the right moments, even asked Caleb how business was going. Caleb said, "Better than ever," then added, "Guess I got lucky after losing her." The table went quiet for a second. Ethan nodded and said, "I'd say we both got lucky." Then he poured Caleb another drink. Everyone laughed, relieved by his composure. I thought I'd won the exchange, proof that Ethan could take a joke, but something about the way he looked at Caleb after that made my stomach twist. As the night went on, the lines blurred between charm and disrespect. Caleb helped me bring out dessert, brushing my arm in the kitchen. He said, "You really upgraded, huh? Big house, nice man." I said, "He's steady." Caleb grinned and said, "You never liked steady." I laughed and said, "Maybe I grew up." He said, "No, you didn't." I didn't notice Ethan standing in the hallway until he spoke. "You left your phone in the living room," he said. His voice was calm. I said, "Thanks." He handed it to me and walked away. Caleb whispered, "He's cool with this?" I said, "He trusts me." Caleb smirked. "Then he's a better man than I'd ever be." When we returned to the living room, Nora was pouring wine, trying to keep the mood alive. She said, "Everyone good?" Caleb raised his glass and said, "To old flames and new beginnings." The room went awkwardly quiet for a second. I laughed, trying to save it. "To friendship," I said quickly. But the damage was done. Martha, who had stayed longer than I expected, stood up and said, "I think I've had enough of this performance." She thanked Ethan, kissed Liam goodnight, and left without looking at me. After she was gone, I turned to Ethan and said, "She's impossible." He said, "No, she just has a lower tolerance for pretending." Then he smiled again, that same small, knowing smile, and went to refill drinks. Later, when most of the guests had moved to the patio, Nora cornered me. "You're playing with fire," she said quietly. I said, "You sound like Mom." She said, "I sound like someone watching a train wreck." I brushed her off, saying Ethan didn't even care. "He's fine," I said. "He's too calm for this to mean anything." Caleb and Ethan ended up outside together, talking about work. I joined them halfway through. Caleb said, "You've got a good one, Ethan. Not many husbands would be this chill." Ethan said, "Why would I be upset? She invited you. She knows what she's doing." His tone was even, but I heard the edge underneath. Caleb chuckled nervously, said, "Then I'll stay out of trouble." Ethan nodded. "That's always smart." I changed the subject fast, pretending to laugh, trying to restore the lightness. But something had shifted in the air. By the end of the night, guests began leaving in pairs, whispering polite goodbyes. Caleb was one of the last to go. He hugged me at the door, saying, "You're still the same." Ethan stood beside me, holding the door open. He said, "Thanks for coming. Drive safe." Caleb hesitated for a second, then left. When the door closed, I expected Ethan to explode, but he didn't. He just started collecting empty glasses. I followed him, trying to sound casual. "So, that went well, right?" He didn't answer. I said, "You're not really mad, are you?" He said, "No." He stacked the plates quietly. "Just tired." I laughed a little, forcing cheerfulness. "You could have said something if you were uncomfortable." He looked up, meeting my eyes. "I didn't want to embarrass you." His voice was steady, but it made my stomach clench. I said, "Embarrass me? You think I did something wrong?" He said, "I think you did exactly what you meant to." I tried to argue, but he walked past me and disappeared upstairs. 10 minutes later, I heard the faint sound of drawers opening. When I went up, I found him in our bedroom, folding my clothes into a suitcase. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Making things easier." I laughed nervously. "You're being ridiculous." He said, "Maybe, but at least I'm finally being honest." He zipped the bag and set it on the floor. "You can stay with Nora for a while," he said. "You'll need time to explain to yourself what tonight really was." I said, "You're overreacting. It was a party." He said, "No, it was a preview." Then he left the room, leaving me standing there with the suitcase half full and the sound of his calm footsteps fading down the stairs. The house that had felt so full an hour ago was suddenly silent. I sat on the bed, staring at the open closet, and realized for the first time that Ethan wasn't bluffing. Whatever he was planning, it wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be quiet and permanent. The morning after the party, the silence felt heavier than any argument could have. The house was spotless, as if the chaos of the night before had been wiped away. Ethan had already left for work by the time I came downstairs. His coffee mug was washed, His shoes were gone, and the only sign he'd been there was a note on the counter. I dropped Liam at school. You might want to take some time for yourself today. I stared at the words, unsure if they were meant as kindness or warning. I told myself he'd cool off, that this was just another one of his quiet sulks. He always came around. That was his thing. Wait until I apologized, then act like everything was fine. Only this time, I didn't plan to apologize. I didn't think I had anything to apologize for. When Nora called to check in, she sounded hesitant. So, she said, how bad was it after I left? I said, he packed a bag for me. She gasped. You're kidding. I said, he's being dramatic. She said, Celine, you danced with your ex in front of his family. I said, it was 2 minutes, not a scandal. She sighed. He's not the type to make threats, you know that. If he packed your bag, it's because he's made up his mind. That stuck with me longer than I wanted it to. I went to work anyway, pretending everything was fine. At the clinic, people whispered but didn't ask. The receptionist, Ava, finally leaned over and said, Your husband okay? He looked tense last night. I forced a laugh. He's just dramatic about appearances. She said, Well, he handled himself better than most would. That annoyed me, how everyone always praised his restraint, as if silence was some moral achievement. At lunch, I checked my phone. No message from him. I texted, We need to talk tonight. No reply. Later, another message. Are you coming home for dinner? Still nothing. By the time I got home, the lights were dim, and the house looked staged, everything too clean, too still. My suitcase was gone from the bedroom. Panic rose in my chest. I called his name, checked the closets, the garage. Nothing. Then I noticed an envelope on the kitchen table next to my phone. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside was a short note. Don't look for me at home for a while. We both need space. I'll handle Liam's routine this week. No greeting, no signature. Just that cold, practical detachment he used when he was done trying. I called him immediately, straight to voicemail. I left a message, trying to sound calm. You're overreacting. We're adults, Ethan. Don't make this into something it's not. When he didn't call back, I texted Nora. He left. Says he needs space. She replied, He's with Mom. Don't show up there. Give it a day. That night, I opened a bottle of wine and scrolled through social media, pretending everything was normal. Photos from the party had started showing up. Me smiling with Caleb, me laughing, Ethan in the background, face unreadable. Under one photo, someone had commented, braver than most men I know. Another wrote, couple goals. I almost laughed. The next morning, Martha called. I considered ignoring her, but curiosity won. He's with me, she said, before I could speak. He's fine. Liam's fine. You should focus on your choices. I said, You've always hated me. She said, I tried to understand you, but last night you proved who you really are. I said, It was a party. She said, It was public humiliation. There's a difference. I tried to argue, but she spoke over me. He's meeting a lawyer this week, she said. My breath caught. For what? I asked. To protect himself. Don't say I didn't warn you. Then she hung up. I called Nora immediately. She's bluffing, I said. Nora was quiet. Then she said, Celine, she's not. The next few days blurred into a fog of denial. Ethan didn't come home. He didn't answer calls. When I showed up at his mother's house, Martha met me at the door and said, This isn't your home anymore. Liam peeked out from behind her leg, eyes wide. I crouched down and said, Hey, sweetheart, Daddy and I are just sorting some things out. He said, Daddy said you have to rest. I froze. Rest? He nodded. He said you get tired when you talk too much. Martha pulled him back gently and closed the door. Back in the car, I screamed, one short, sharp sound that startled even me. Then I sat there, gripping the wheel, realizing he was doing it. He was taking everything away, quietly, legally, deliberately. At work, people had started avoiding me. Even Ava wouldn't make eye contact. Caleb texted once. "I heard he moved out. You okay?" I typed a reply. "You started this, but didn't send it." The truth was, I started it. I'd pushed every boundary because I thought Ethan wouldn't fight back. On Friday, a courier arrived at the clinic asking for my signature. Inside the envelope was a preliminary notice, legal separation. Attached were printed screenshots from the party's group chat, photos from social media, and a list of witness names. My own sister's was on it. I went home shaking. I poured another drink and stared at the pages. It was all so clean, so organized. No drama, no confrontation, just evidence. At the end was a typed paragraph. Petitioner requests shared custody of minor child, sole ownership of residence, and separation on grounds of emotional cruelty. I called him again, this time leaving a longer voicemail. "You're destroying us over nothing. Do you even hear yourself? You're making me the villain to justify leaving." He didn't answer, but 2 hours later, another envelope slid under my door. Inside was a single line written in his handwriting. "You already played the villain. I'm just cleaning up after the story." I tore the note in half and threw it across the room, but it didn't make me feel better. Nothing did. That night, I sat in our living room, surrounded by the silence he'd left behind, realizing the one thing I used to mock him for, his stillness, was the very thing destroying me now. The next week, I stopped pretending to be calm. Every morning, I woke up expecting Ethan to call, to admit this had gone too far, but he didn't. Instead, there were more envelopes, formal ones this time, thick with documents I didn't want to read. Legal separation, custody proposals, asset division, all with his name printed neatly at the top and mine listed beneath as respondent. I couldn't get past that word. Respondent. Like I was being accused of something I couldn't deny. When I showed the papers to Nora, she stared at them for a long time. "He's not playing anymore," she said quietly. I snapped, "He's being vindictive." She said, "No, he's being smart." I said, "You're supposed to be on my side." She said, "I was, until I saw what you called him in that chat." I felt my stomach twist. "He showed you?" She didn't answer, just looked away. That was all the confirmation I needed. "He's manipulating you," I said. Nora said, "You embarrassed him in front of everyone, Celine. He's just finally standing up for himself." Then she stood up and left. That afternoon, I went to the dental clinic, desperate for distraction, but even there the air had changed. People kept their voices low when I entered the break room. Ava gave me a polite smile and said, "Maybe you should take some time off." I said, "You're all acting like I killed someone." She said, "You just made it easy for people to pick sides." By the time I got home, I was furious. I grabbed my phone and called Ethan again. To my surprise, he answered. His tone was calm, almost detached. "Celine," he said, "this isn't helping you." I said, "You're making me look like a monster." He said, "I'm not making you look like anything. You did that yourself." I started to cry, but he didn't react. He just said, "You'll hear from my lawyer about visitation." I said, "You're using our son against me." He said, "I'm protecting him from this." Then the line went dead. The next day, I met with a lawyer of my own, a woman named Dana, who seemed unimpressed from the start. She flipped through the documents Ethan had sent, her eyes scanning fast. "He's thorough," she said finally. "He's got timelines, screenshots, witness statements." I said, "It was a misunderstanding." Dana said, "A misunderstanding doesn't come with photographic proof." She held up a page. "This is you at your housewarming, holding hands with your ex while your husband watched." I leaned forward. "We weren't holding hands. We were passing a plate." She raised an eyebrow. "That's not what it looks like." I felt my cheeks burn. "This is ridiculous," I said. "He's acting like I cheated." Dana said, "You didn't need to. You humiliated him in public. Legally, that's emotional cruelty. She advised me to stay quiet, to stop posting online, to stop contacting Ethan directly. He's documenting everything now, she said. Every text, every voicemail. If you keep reaching out, you'll make his case stronger. But I couldn't stop. That night, I sent him a long message, half apology, half attack. We built this life together, Ethan. You can't just erase me because of one mistake. He didn't reply. Instead, the next morning, I got an automated email from a mediation service. All communication moving forward must go through legal channels. I threw my phone across the room and screamed. When I finally went to see my mother-in-law again, something inside me needed to face her. She opened the door without surprise. I thought you'd come eventually, she said. You always do when you realize you've gone too far. I said, you've been poisoning him against me. She said, no, I've just been here to watch what happens when a man finally decides to stop being your audience. Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. I asked if I could see Liam. She said, he's at school. I said, can I pick him up later? She said, not without the court's permission. Then she handed me another envelope. You should read this before it's read for you. It was Ethan's affidavit, his statement to the court. I opened it in the car, hands shaking. He'd written about the party, about the jokes, about my habit of public belittlement. He'd written that I used humor as a weapon and that it had turned our marriage into a performance. The last line read, I don't want to punish her, I just want peace. That line broke something in me, not because of its cruelty, but because of its calmness. I showed the affidavit to Nora that night, expecting her to comfort me. Instead, she said, he's right, you know. I said, you're taking his side again. She said, I'm taking the side of whoever's telling the truth. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. She was right. A few days later, Dana called. He's filing for temporary custody, she said. You need to start preparing statements. I said, he can't take my son. She said, if he proves emotional instability, he can. I said, I'm not unstable. She said, then stop acting like you are. That night, I stayed up reading every text Ethan and I had ever sent each other. There were years of small kindnesses, inside jokes, moments I'd long forgotten. But somewhere along the way, the tone had changed. I'd gone from teasing him to testing him, from love to superiority, and he'd stopped pushing back. Now, his silence was proof of something final, something I couldn't undo. At 3 a.m, I got up and walked through the house. Every room looked staged, soulless. The new curtains I'd chosen suddenly looked ridiculous. The photos on the wall, all those smiling faces, felt like someone else's life. Then, out of habit, I checked the mailbox before going to bed. Another envelope was waiting. This one wasn't from his lawyer. It was from Ethan himself. Inside was a single sheet of paper with his handwriting. I hope you stop mistaking attention for love. I won't be part of your performance anymore. I sat at the kitchen table until sunrise, staring at the note, and realized that for the first time in our marriage, he had said something I couldn't argue against. The court date came faster than I thought it would. Weeks blurred together until all that remained were papers, phone calls, and sleepless nights. By the time the hearing arrived, I looked like a stranger in my own reflection, tired eyes, clenched jaw, pretending composure I didn't feel. Dana told me to wear something neutral, to stay calm, to let remorse speak louder than pride. The judge already knows who he is, she said. Now she's deciding who you are. The courthouse smelled like old paper and disinfectant. Ethan was already there when I arrived, sitting with Daniel Wu, his lawyer. He looked steady, almost peaceful, in a dark suit I'd picked out for him years ago. I hated that he still looked like someone I'd built. He didn't glance at me when I walked in. He just stood, nodded politely, and sat back down. I told myself that meant he still cared, that he was avoiding me because it hurt to look. But the truth was simpler. He was done. When the hearing started, the judge, A woman with silver hair and glasses low on her nose reviewed the files quietly before speaking. "This case involves claims of emotional misconduct and reputational harm," she said. Her tone was flat, professional. "I expect both parties to remain civil." Dana nudged me when it was time to speak. My heart thudded so hard it felt like everyone could hear it. I said, "There was never any abuse, no betrayal. I just made mistakes in how I spoke. We were joking." The judge asked, "Joking in what context?" I said, "In messages. With friends. It wasn't serious." She flipped through the printed pages of those jokes and said, "Were these friends also guests in your marital home?" I nodded. She looked up. Then the context was public. Ethan didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on his folded hands while Daniel presented his side, methodical, clean. "My client has no wish to humiliate his wife," Daniel said. "He only seeks distance from the humiliation she made public." He handed the judge a folder filled with photos, screenshots, statements. I recognized every image, every line of text. Even his silence is small. He's harmless. He's boring but stable, like a houseplant. Each word was mine, printed in black ink, stripped of tone or defense. The judge asked if I wanted to respond. I said, "That's not fair. He's cherry-picking." She said, "These are your words." I said, "It was supposed to be funny." She said, "Do you still think it is?" The question hit harder than anything else that day. I opened my mouth but couldn't answer. Dana whispered, "Just stay quiet." So I did. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he didn't. He just handed the judge another page, his closing statement. She read it silently, then said aloud, "He wishes for resolution through peace, not punishment." Then she looked at me and said, "You're fortunate he's not asking for damages." That was when I broke. "So I lose everything because I laughed," I said. "Because I made a joke." The judge didn't even flinch. "Because you turned a marriage into an audience," she said. "There's a difference." During recess, I stood in the hallway, shaking. Nora found me there, having come with Martha to support Ethan. "Don't look at me like that," I said. She said, "I warned you." I said, "You're enjoying this." She said, "No, I'm just tired of watching you blame everyone but yourself." When the hearing resumed, the judge reviewed custody. Ethan had already prepared a plan. Shared time, financial stability, schooling, everything written in clean lines. I had nothing but excuses. When asked about my living situation, I said, "I'm staying in the house." Daniel interjected, "The property is in dispute. My client's name is on the mortgage." The judge nodded and said, "Until a final order, the petitioner retains occupancy." That was it. The home I'd decorated, the life I'd curated, it was his, at least for now. I wanted to scream that he'd taken everything, but then I realized he hadn't taken it. I'd handed it over piece by piece, every time I opened my mouth to feel powerful. When the hearing ended, Ethan stood. He buttoned his jacket and looked at me for the first time in weeks. His expression was calm, not cold, like he'd already mourned me. He walked past without speaking, but as he reached the door, he paused. "You always said silence was weakness," he said softly. "I guess it just needed time to prove itself." Then he left. Dana put a hand on my shoulder. "You need to prepare for the written decision," she said. "It'll come in a few days." I said, "He can't take Liam from me." She said, "He already has custody until review. You need to show stability if you want it reconsidered." I laughed bitterly. Stability? Everyone thinks I'm the unstable one because I showed emotion. Dana said, "Because you showed it too late." That night I went home to an echo. The house was too clean, too organized. I poured a drink and sat on the floor beside the couch. The silence pressed in like water. My phone buzzed, a message from Caleb. "Heard about court. You okay?" I typed back. He used everything against me. Then I deleted it before sending. I scrolled through my old messages with Ethan instead, the ones before things went wrong. Little notes like, "I'll pick up dinner, and you make hard days easier." They looked foreign now, as if written by strangers who'd once been us. At midnight, Nora texted, "The judge's decision comes Monday. Don't contact him. It won't help." I stared at the message until my screen went dark. I whispered into the empty room, "He can't just erase me." But deep down, I knew he already had. Legally, quietly, and without ever raising his voice. The decision arrived on a grey Monday morning, sealed in a plain white envelope. No ceremony, no warning. Just paper and ink ending a life I'd spent years pretending was unshakable. I stood by the mailbox for a long time before opening it, half expecting to see something different inside. A message, a plea, a sign that Ethan still wanted to fix things. But it was exactly what I feared. Custody awarded to petitioner. Residence awarded to petitioner. Contact limited to supervised visitation until review. I read the words twice before the meaning sank in. Ethan had won, quietly, efficiently, completely. I called Nora right away. "He took everything," I said, my voice breaking. She didn't sound surprised. "Celine, he didn't take it," she said softly. "You gave it away." I shouted, "You don't understand. It was one night, one stupid party." She said, "It was every night you made him feel small." Then she hung up. The house felt smaller after that, like it had been hollowed out. I wandered from room to room, looking at the things I once bragged about, the framed photos, the scented candles, the expensive curtains, and realized none of it mattered without someone to admire it with me. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was punishment. Later that afternoon, a knock at the door startled me. It was a courier again, holding another envelope. I thought it was more paperwork, but inside was a handwritten note from Ethan. "Please pack your belongings by the weekend. I'll come with Liam to collect the rest. Let's keep it calm for his sake." That was it. No anger, no emotion, just an ending written like a reminder. I sat on the couch clutching that note, and for the first time, I understood the kind of revenge Ethan had chosen. Not dramatic, not cruel, just lawful, steady, complete. The kind of revenge that left no space to argue. On Friday, I started packing. Each item I folded felt like evidence of my arrogance. Clothes I'd bought to look impressive, gifts I'd dismissed, things I'd once used to mock his taste. By Saturday, the rooms were almost empty. When I reached the living room, I stopped. That's where the housewarming had begun, where I'd laughed too loudly, where Caleb's hand brushed mine, while Ethan watched in silence. It felt like walking into the scene of a crime. When Ethan finally arrived, he didn't come inside at first. He waited at the door, holding Liam's hand. Liam looked older somehow, distant. "Hey, buddy," I said, forcing a smile. He waved weakly. Ethan nodded at me. "We'll load the boxes and go," he said. His tone was polite, businesslike. As he moved through the house, I followed him. "You could have talked to me," I said quietly. He didn't answer. "You could have forgiven me," I added. He paused, looked at me, and said, "Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting." Then he turned away. Liam came over and handed me something, a folded drawing. It was of a house, 2 stick figures, and a line between them. "That's you and Daddy," he said. "You're still in the same picture." I almost cried. "That's nice," I whispered. Ethan took his hand again. "Come on, buddy," he said gently. When they left, I stood in the doorway and watched them walk to the car. Ethan opened the door for Liam, then turned back toward me. "You wanted to be admired," he said softly. "Now everyone sees you. I hope that's enough." Then he got in and drove away. The sound of the engine faded, and the house fell silent again. I walked back inside, stood in the middle of the empty living room, and looked at the faint marks on the wall where our pictures used to hang. My reflection in the window looked foreign, someone older, smaller. I whispered, "It was just one night, one joke." But the words felt hollow, because deep down, I knew it hadn't been one night. It had been years of little cruelties dressed as confidence, of using laughter to cover contempt. Now, Ethan's silence was all that remained, and it spoke louder than I ever could. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.